All right, so you want to start deprogramming modernist mythologies, modernist mindsets that you may have accidentally been exposed to in your learning environments growing up in school and college especially. And you've accumulated this worldview that now you are starting to question and wonder, does it have as strong a foundation as you had been told, led to believe? All right, so here we are. Where do we start? If you want to become a traditionalist, which I'm assuming you are if you're at this channel, because this is what I'm doing this year. I'm doing a series on essentially how to live a traditional Western Christian lifestyle. This is video 3 in that series. If you haven't seen the other 2, you can go watch them now. Otherwise, stay tuned, subscribe and turn on notifications to get the next videos in the series every Sunday. And I also put up some vlogs on Saturdays you can check out. All right, so you want to become a trad. You want to dabble in this traditional lifestyle to see if maybe it's a good fit for you. See if maybe it'll bring that quality of life that you are so in need of. All right, well, I'm here to break down what? No spinning water. So I am a traditional Roman Catholic. I'm not an evangelical Christian. So my perspective on what it means to be traditional is a little bit more medieval, let's say. I'm basing a lot of my sources on the great Western philosophers, Aristotle, the scholastics, Thomas Aquinas especially, for my worldview, to get a traditional worldview, a non-modernist one. So as you know, the modernist worldview is based on the mythology of evolution. And I say mythology because it's really told like a creation story. Once upon a time, long time ago, there was a big bang and then erupted something out of nothing. All of the order emerged spontaneously out of chaos and gradually became even more ordered and more sophisticated over billions and billions of years. So this is a story. This is the myth of evolution. And you ask, all right, if you are a traditional philosopher like myself, if you're from the Middle Ages, you start to wonder, all right, so this mythos that you've created here, where is the efficient cause? You know, where's the power coming from? The efficient cause. And if you are a student of philosophy, you should know what the 4 causes are. I have a video linked in the description if you want to go and get a refresher on what the 4 causes are. Essentially, it is to asking the question why. Why is this here? Or why anything? What is it? You can deduce 4 answers, 4 types of answers. And this goes back all the way to Aristotle. And the 4 causes are material, formal, efficient, and final. Those are the 4 causes. Go watch the video to get the lowdown on all of them. But essentially what we're asking the modernist mythology is, where is the efficient cause of all this? Where's this power coming from? Where does the power come from? Because nothing comes from nothing, right? You can't have a fire unless you light it, or, unless there's a spark to make the ignition happen, and even then it's not everything that rubs together creates a spark. Only certain objects, certain types of things can do that. So you start asking this question, what was there at the beginning that caused the Big Bang? What was there at the beginning that exploded? If this is the efficient cause, is this explosion? All this power comes from this explosion. All right, so that's what it seems to be saying. What are you saying? What are you doing? What do you want? No, go back and play. It's almost dinner time. I'll make dinner. Go back and play. No getting into snacks. Close the door. All right. So you start asking questions about what's actually happening in this mythology, in this story. What were the elements that caused this ignition? to happen? Where did those elements come from? What materials were they made of? Was it one element? Was it just iron, or that was so dense it exploded? How did it become dense? Like, where did the density come from? And if it was just one element, how did we end up with the whole periodic table of elements? Where did all of those come from? Or were all of those mashed into this ball of density? And then if that's the case, how big was this initial matter? Because we can't have more matter from no matter. So all of the matter that exists now would have had to have existed then, because you don't get something from nothing, right? So all of this matter existed then. Okay, so then we still haven't answered the question, where did the matter come from? Where is the beginning of all of this? Okay, so there's an explosion because certain materials ignited. Where did the materials come from? Did matter exist forever, eternally? That seems to go against our understanding of physics. But then from that you have, how did living, breathing things emerge from this soupy sea of periodic table elements? How all of a sudden are we able to speak and think and talk about lofty things like reason and logic? Where did that come from? And once again, the modernist says that man in all of his rational glory just sort of emerges out of this mud without any sort of direction or purpose or director or designer, right? He just gradually, over billions of years, right? That's what they say that. They say over billions of years, mud can turn into a walking, talking, living, breathing, thinking human being. You just need billions of years for it. Okay. So this is where I find the argument to be the most ludicrous, the most obviously unsound. Because even I know that time itself is a measurement. It is not an efficient cause, right? Time does not give you power. Time is merely the measurement of the amount of sequences that have passed, the amount of generations that have occurred. So time does not cause a father to give birth to a child. Time is just what measures the distance between father and son and grandson. It doesn't actually cause father and son and grandson. See what I'm saying? Time is not an efficient cause. So to give mud more time to have a baby and produce a human being is ludicrous, because the mud has to have humanness already in order to pass that on. That's not something that's just acquired by sun, like the mud sitting out in the sun all day. Like, I like to, as a mother, as a wife and mother, I'm sure many of you guys can relate to this, but I like to think all the time in the world is not going to get the dishes to sprout arms and legs and wash themselves and put themselves in the dishwasher for me. I can leave those dishes all day long in the sink. They're not going to turn into human beings. This is like as gradual as a process as you can imagine. Like, how does animation, life, soul emerge out of something as sterile and empty and cold as a rock or mud? Assuming that the rock and the mud can even exist on their own in the first place. That's ridiculous to begin with. All right, but it's even more obnoxious to think that mud can produce anything alive, anything living. Okay, so I want to just backtrack and let's look at how this theory, this mythos of evolution emerged in history, because this theory did not come about by unanimous consent of the people, like, the tribal people looking and going, oh, of course, naturally, things just, matter and material just sprung into existence on its own. No one thinks that. That's why we always ask that question, where did this come from? And that we have this sense of awe and wonder, like, what is going on here, that there is existence in front of me? Like, we all have that innate sense of wonder and awe. And if the answer is, well, it's just always been there, it just is, it produced itself, then it should be obvious, right? Anyway, it's clearly not obvious to most people. So what happened was this theory of evolution was sort of concocted as a thought experiment by atheists. So these people were like, all right, well, let's do some armchair philosophy and let's see if we can come up with some sort of explanation for the material, formal causes of the world that we see. Let's see if we can come up, let's ignore final causality and ignore the ultimate efficient cause. Let's pretend that God doesn't exist, and like the uncaused cause, the prime mover, intelligent designer, we're gonna put that over here for a minute, and just for the sake of argument, just to see, sort of like we're just gonna build this thought experiment and see what we can come up with for how this all works, how reality works if we just ignore that, for a minute. So this whole theory presupposes that there is no God. Like that, the theory itself is founded upon the principle of willfully ignoring the purposeness that is clearly designed into things. So when we see, why do we have hands? So that we can eat. There is a purpose for why we have hands. They are not just random and nonsensical. We clearly see purpose in creation, and we can say, well, this grows here because of, because these animals eat that, or something like that. There is clearly an order for things. So what the evolutionists did at the beginning of their thought experiment was to essentially ignore the obvious, ignore purpose in things, pretend like purpose isn't real, pretend like we can't actually see, which we can see in front of us, the purpose of things, that there is a clearly design element of objects in the world. There is that. So we're going to pretend that we don't see that for the sake of argument, right? And you can do that. You can delve into an argument, and that's kind of a fun thing to think about. What would the world look like if it wasn't operating based on purpose? And you can think about that. But to do that, you have to ignore the obvious reality that things clearly do have purposes. All right. So, and not only that, but they wanted to ignore the efficient cause, ultimate efficient cause. Like you can say, which is God, the unmoved mover. Let's pretend like there is no unmoved mover. What moved the first thing? It's like, well, how can you even think about what moved the first thing if you took out the philosophical answer that we have for what moves the world? And trying to come up with a different answer, but they don't come up with a different answer. They don't come up with a replacement. They just ignore the obvious reality that's there. So they set up this whole mythos, this whole mythology, based on principles of ignoring final cause and ignoring the ultimate efficient cause. Okay? So everything has to work within that framework. The stories they build up, the reasons they give for things, have to ignore those two things. So naturally, what kind of conclusions are you going to come to? Naturally, it's going to produce conclusions that don't have final and efficient causality in them, because that was what they started with. They founded their whole thought experiment on not having those things, so you're not going to find them in the conclusion. And then when they don't see them in the conclusion, they're like, oh, see, there is no purpose to life. It was like, no, you can't. You told us to ignore purposefulness, pretend like we didn't see it. We do actually see it, but we were just pretending for the sake of the thought experiment. Well, now, but then they try to say, but no, this is real. The reality is there is no purpose to these things. And there was this one article that cracked me up, and it was talking about sunflowers. And you know how sunflowers, they turn to face the sun, right? That's why they're called sunflowers. The scientific article was like, oh, now we know that sunflowers don't actually turn in order to face the sun. That's not what they're doing. There's no purpose there. What's actually happening is there's a series of chemical reactions happening in the stem which turn the flower. It's like they're replacing material cause, the chemical reactions in the stem of the thing, the actual process of the turning, and saying because we can see that there is an actual process of the turning, we know that there is no purpose to the turning, that it wasn't turning in order to see the sun, in order to face the sun. They want to take out that whole thing, but you can see how ridiculous that is to say. You can't just replace and ignore purpose written into things. Okay. So within this mythos, there are some certain gods. Now, this religion, it is a religion. This modernist mindset, mythology, it is their religion. It's not a very sophisticated religion. It's not a very beautiful religion. It's not a very satisfying religion. It's a very empty and depressing religion. So it doesn't have that many gods. It has 3 main gods that I've seen. Let me know if you recognize any more. But I think their 3 biggest gods in their pantheon are Father Time, because they give this power of creation to time itself. Billions of years can produce something out of nothing. It's like, when did a measurement? It's like saying billions of inches can create a giraffe's neck or something. It's like the measurement does not cause the thing. Okay, so Father Time is their god. They really love time, and they'll sacrifice for time, for the future, to prepare for the future. They sacrifice to their god of time. And, traditionalists do to a certain extent, make sacrifices for the future. But traditional peoples in general weren't sacrificing to the god of time. Their gods were Zeus, or these omnipotent beings that were very human-like and persons. All right. So here we have this impersonal Father Time. The next thing, that other god they have is this omnipotent matter, this Mother Nature, this sort of, what is it called? Primordial sludge that just births all of creation out of the mud from its own potential, because it has infinite potential and it actualizes itself. So this is Mother Nature. This is why they worship Mother Nature, because this is a god to them. The material world itself is worshipped as a god to them, because they have no other god. They see the matter as having godlike characteristics of bringing itself forth from nothing, which is a god characteristic. All right, the third god is themselves. Individualism. The third god of the evolutionary paradigm is the individual, me. For you, it's you. And that's because your experience is really only unique to you, and you can't really know someone else's experience. And you're sort of like reaching out into the dark unknown of the uncreated future and creating as you go. Like, you are like a god, and whatever your will is what's true, because how can you know otherwise? There's no higher authority than you. There's nothing above you that designed you. You have essentially designed yourself without even being aware of it. You're that smart. You're that powerful that your very cells and DNA just concocted themselves and are reaching towards perfection on their own. So you have this achievement instilled within your very being, and so whatever your feelings are, whatever your hunches are, those are you, and you do you. You can really only know your own internal experience of this reality. So it's very isolating. It's very odd and isolating, and because it ignores objective reality. It ignores the essential characteristic of the world, essentialism, essences of things that that there are humans. It really goes so far as to say that there is no difference between a human and an ape. Essentially, there's no difference, right? So then how can we define one? That's what definition does. It points out the difference. So it ignores that there is a difference there, and it's an act of the will, not an act of the intellect. It's the act of the will to ignore these differences that you see in nature, the different kinds of things, because they've already come to the conclusion that everything came from each other down this long line of gradual, from the imperfect to the perfect, to the more perfect. So everything, and you can't get something different from something the same. So there has to be something similar enough in us that we could come from the chimpanzees, and they could come from the primordial sludge. We all have to kind of have an essential similarity instead of an essential difference. So right there, anyway, yeah, right there, it's ignoring the reality that we see because they've already come to a conclusion that they like. Okay. So let's see if we can unravel this a little further. I have some videos to watch on this so that you can go a lot deeper into this. I'm really just skimming the surface. But if you want to learn more about this, I have them linked in the description. There's one called Traditional Catholic Doctrine of Creation on Sensus Fidelium. That's a long one. It's going to be one you're going to want to listen to, for sure. Also, Restoring the Faith has a great one called Why Does the Dogma of Creation Matter? And there it's an interview. It's a really good interview. You should listen to it. Because obviously, there are certain conclusions that are the result of this whole paradigm of thought. This whole thought experiment of evolution, this whole mythology that was created to explain reality. There are conclusions that now follow from that are wrong. They're nonsense, essentially. But people are so, what's the word? They believe them so much that they're willing to accept nonsense as truth. For example, we know that nothing comes from nothing, right? You can't give what you don't have, right? Well, evolution clearly is contrary to that. Because matter, not only does it give what it doesn't have, the mud creates the soul, which, the human life, biology, comes from geology. It gave what it doesn't have, so there is already a conflict with reason, right reason. But in its core of its creed, it believes that everything came from nothing, that nothing itself, the vast nothingness of the world, no potential to be anything, the vast nothingness somehow popped everything into existence. It logically doesn't make sense. It's a non sequitur. So it produces these illogical conclusions that you can't accept and have a traditional way of thinking. All right, so we've talked about there's no real difference between the kinds of things. So there can't be a real difference between a human and a sheep because there's some sort of string along the same ancestral line. And then this is, they continue to deny purposefulness. If you see something that looks like purpose in reality, that looks like it was designed. That looks a lot like purpose. You just have to deny it and ignore it and replace it with something that's not satisfying, like a material cause, like I was saying with the sunflowers. So it doesn't actually refute purpose in things. It just continually denies it because that's part of the principle of the very thought experiment. You have to pretend like purpose doesn't exist. All right. So then what comes from this also is morality is thrown out the window. Morality is, because once again, I am the greatest, most trustworthy designer or creator of my life. I am a god, and I cause myself into perfection, you know, consciously and subconsciously on so many different levels, then morality is really designed by me and my feelings and my intuition. And my intuition is actually probably better than my reason, because reason has come later in life. Intuition is what we've had since we were bacteria emerging from the primordial sludge. So we should follow our feelings and our instincts and our nervous system and see how we feel about making decisions instead of using our logic and our reason, because those are kind of newer add-ons in the evolutionary series of life. So morality is sort of a discovery where we continually discover within ourselves what we think is the truth. And it's also arbitrary. If it's culturally imposed, it's sort of arbitrary. Someone thought it was a good idea, maybe they had good reasons for it, and then they imposed it, and because, you know, we kind of followed along with it, but we don't need to follow that now. We can throw that off and we'll be just fine. Traditions and customs are, for the most part, arbitrary and not actually given to us by God, like we would say with the Bible. God gave his law. And this is where I'm going to pick on Jordan Peterson a little bit. Great speaker, love listening to his stuff, but I will not listen. I started listening to it, but I turned it off. I will not listen to him talk about the Bible or anything Christian, because he is a modernist. He has this, he's not a Marxist, but he has this, and Marxists are modernists, you know, they latch on to this evolutionary theory, and this is their paradigm that they're living in. So Marxism is birthed from this viewing of reality. But when he goes into talking about the Bible and Christian things, he's not talking about God as if he's real and actually gave commandments to Moses on the mountain and actually spoke to Moses. He'll talk about it like Moses was hearing something in his soul and came up with these rules out of, you know, distilling all of this information from within, and then he magically produces these laws which he attributes to God. And that's not how tradition works. Like, that's not how a traditionalist would see the world. That's not how Moses saw the world. Moses talked to God, and he believed he talked to God. And when he came down from that mountain, he was a changed man. And he had the white beard and the white hair. He was physically changed from his experience speaking to God. And God gave him laws. And these laws, he spoke to him, and he wrote them down in stone. And that's because he knew how important it would be. It wasn't his own ideas that he's attributing this to. He's attributing it to God. So the man who's come up with this is saying, this isn't from me. The man who's leading these people through the desert is saying, I'm not the one leading it. This is not coming from me. I'm not the God of my life. You know, like a evolutionary modernist would see themselves as. He definitely doesn't see himself that way. So I think it's an absolute terrible way to read scripture and to read Christianity from this evolutionary biology, psychology perspective. So I highly dissuade you from going down that route if you want to go full trad. And honestly, I think full trad I think it makes more sense, which is why I'm sharing what I've learned. Because full trad is Western philosophy. It is Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, the scholastics. And to get an idea of Western philosophy, you really need to start ingesting it and learning it. I have some more videos. Like I said, I have a video on the 4 causes. I also have one of the 5 ways to prove that God exists. You can know with certainty that God exists just from these 5 proofs. Okay, these five ways of knowing. Because knowledge and our way of knowing and our way of understanding and learning the truth is a real mechanism of our intellect. And so this is something that the great Western philosophers discovered. They discovered this about our reason. They discovered how our reason works, how our intellect works, how our will works. And the great Catholic scholastics really improved upon it and took what was good in all of their philosophy, which was incredible, and married it to Christianity. So that's why check out that channel. It's called the Thomistic Institute. From what I've seen, I haven't watched all of their videos, but from what I've seen, they're really good. Some really good, just like bite-sized philosophy from Aquinas and Aristotle, great Western philosophy. So if you want to get rid of this modernist mindset, you need to put on the Western traditional mindset, which is the traditional philosophy, traditional way of thinking. Which is why I highly, highly recommend, and this is the publishing company I use for my own homeschooling. I taught it in Catholic schools when I was a teacher before I became a mother, and I love it. Okay, it's called Memoria Press. I was blown away by their logic program. I didn't find anything similar to their logic program. So if you are new to Western philosophy and you want to really become a philosopher, not just learn about the philosophy, but like instill this philosophical way of thinking and see if it measures up to, oh yeah, that is how my mind works, and really delve into it, you need to get Memoria Press's book on classical philosophy, classical logic. I have linked the videos talking about it in the description. The significance of their logic program and what is logic. What is classical logic? So go check those out. That will give you, that is like, logic is traditional Western Christian mindset 101. That's what it is. So you learn logic, and that workbook that they've put together is so well done that you can teach your kids it. It's good for 7th grade and up is what I think it's recommended for, but it's great for adults too if you want to learn. Anyway, so that's the start. Is there's a whole how do you put it? There's a wealth of knowledge of Western philosophy that is much more sophisticated, much more satisfying, much more honest and truthful than this evolutionary mythology that was created by modernists so that they could come up with a system where they could talk about the world without having to talk about God, because they didn't want to talk about God. That it was fabricated, it's artificial, and it uses a part of your imagination, where you're just trying to come up with an impossible hypothetical scenario, essentially. So you can't even be certain of the conclusions it comes to. That's one thing that really bothers me about it, because it's not like it is this pure material. Only material causes are examined. No, you can't examine the world like that in this highly specialized way while trying to ignore the other causes of things, because you end up not seeing the big picture and being satisfied with with a lot less, because you're not using your full imagination. You're not using your full sense of wonder, because you've kind of put a wall up and a limit to how much you can wonder about. So you don't. So it's really closed-minded. You can't really be very open-minded with it. For instance, one of the things this is just something that I've come across, thought about as a mother, in my experience, being a good modernist and judging all of reality based on my internal feelings. I learned very quickly, and I have a video on this too, you can check it out, there were certain things that helped me through labor, and it was surprising to me from an evolutionary perspective, because in order to endure labor without pain medication, this is a too long didn't read version of it, of the video, in order to endure the pain, well, I essentially didn't feel the pain. And it was because I relaxed, I focused on love, did a lot of loving mindset thinking, had gratitude in my mind. I was all of the emotions about love and gratitude and connection. I just did a bunch of meditation on that, and while I was in pain, at the same time my body was like fight or flight response wants to kick in and trigger, right? And I have to tell my body, no, the fight or flight response is not what we need right now. We need rest and prayer and love and harmony. And this was like an internal struggle for me at first, because, and I do think it's kind of ingrained in us that that survival, we survive because of this fight or flight response. This fight or flight response is what's going to solve our problems. It's what's going to get us through those tough situations. And it really isn't, is it now? My father was a fire chief, and he was in the Air Force. And he is one of the most calm and cool, collected guys in an emergency. His fight or flight response does not kick in an emergency. He has managed to train his body to remain calm, cool, collected, not fight or flight when those big stressful situations happen, because that's when you can think better. You can problem solve better without the fight or flight response. So there seems to be this incongruity, let's say, between the evolutionary perspective, which gives the fight or flight response as the solution and the purpose for everything. Like, oh, why does this happen? Oh, so that they can survive, for survival. Why does this stress happen? So that you can survive. Well, what if the stress is not helping you survive? It was the peace that was helping you survive. Now what? What if it's not the fight or flight response that's bringing forth the next generation, literally bringing new life? What if it's love? Like, where is love in the whole paradigm of the evolutionary theory? Now their God is not love. That's not one that I've identified in the mythology of evolution. They haven't been like, aha, this is it. We found it. We found it. The thing that burst forth everything into creation was love itself. No, that's what the Christians say. That's what the traditionalists say. And to me, love makes a lot more sense from my personal experience of enduring intense pain, labor, pretty intense, and taking care of the next generation. If I'm literally taking care of propagating the species, the internal mechanism, the system that is the most helpful to me is not the fight or flight system. It is the rest and digest, love and connect system. Okay, so why has that been so largely ignored by evolutionary biology? Okay, there have been a lot more studies done on it now, but that certainly isn't what they have built their theories on. They jumped onto evolutionary theory based on this survival of the fittest mindset, might makes right idea. So it's a worldview that is designed by people with an agenda who already knew the conclusions they wanted to find. So you can't argue with an evolutionist. You cannot argue within their little mythological realm that they have created, their hypothetical situation that they've created. You can't argue with them within that realm, because part of being in that realm is that you ignore the obvious. You have to willfully ignore purpose, and you have to willfully ignore ultimate causality. You have to pretend that those aren't real. So they are living in a delusional world, and then they are creating a bunch of experiments and things to prop themselves up, to prop up this delusion. And we know what this is called. This is, what's it called? This is called confirmation bias. We all have confirmation bias. And in order to get around confirmation bias, you have to do your best to look at the other person's perspective as well as they do. So and this is one of the great compliments of Thomas Aquinas. Everyone always says he could say what his opponent's argument was better than his opponent could, because he took the time to look at it from his opponent's perspective as if it were his own, and really think about it to the degree that he thinks, like really breaking it apart. And then he was able to formulate it even better and then dismantle it and say, well, this is why that's wrong. So this is why, if you're going to come over from the evolutionary mindset side of the world, and you are choosing and you want to sort of try on tradition and see what this traditional mindset feels like, looks like, what it does for you, you have to give it that same sort of time of day. You have to pretend, for the sake of argument, that the traditional way is true. Start with that perspective shift. So you have to get out of the evolutionary mindset perspective shift, which we know blocks and ignores certain causalities and certain realities that you see, certain obvious things, and denies purpose and things like that. So you have to get out of that entirely, and you have to say, okay, well, I'll play your game, traditionalists. Let's pretend like the sunflower is turning because it wants to face the sun. What does that mean for a flower? Like, how can a flower want to face the sun? And why does it, and then you can start asking those kind of questions. But to do that, you have to step into the traditional Western Christian mindset first, and before you can dismantle it, I guess you could say, if that's your ultimate goal. If you were a modernist trying to dismantle it, but it's not going to happen because it's truth. It's true, and but this is how you would do it if you wanted to give it a go. So I highly recommend it. Also, let's see, I think I've covered everything. Let me double check. Okay. Okay, so just some things to think about. Becoming more traditional. There'll be more future videos on this sort of thing too, as we delve more deeply into what it means to be a traditionalist from a traditional mindset. Think about sacredness. That's something that traditional peoples always have, sacredness, and that's something that evolutionary, modernist worldview people don't have. They don't have a sense of the sacred. They have a sense for it in their hearts, but they ignore it. It's one of those things that gets ignored. I think it is because they have to sort of artificially shut down their sense of wonder, their internal sense of wonder, to guide their questioning, because they have to say, oh, but we're not going to wonder about purpose, and we're not going to wonder about ultimate efficient causes and stuff like that. It puts a limit on how much you can wonder, and because of that, they don't discover sacred things that are just beyond valuable. And I think it also goes along with, like I was saying, with love, because I think that love is our greatest tool, or the thing we use to measure value in the world, in things, based on how much love is in it and how much love we have for it in our hearts. So there's kind of a two-sided aspect to that, multi-sided aspect. So identifying things that are well-loved is identifying sacred objects, sacred things. Like, how do you know what is the most loved thing in a town? You go to the most sacred place, the place that these people consider the most sacred ground. And what have they done to this place? They have made it the most beautiful temple that they could imagine, right? You don't see this in modernist evolutionary worldview. They don't have a pantheon for their father time and their mother earth. They have like a huge absence. It's just a void of sacredness. There is nothing sacred. Your body, even though you're a god, you can do whatever you want. You don't treat it with sacred, like it's sacred. They treat it so badly because there's no purpose for anything. They ignore purpose, so they don't treat it properly or fittingly, and they don't live with a sense of traditional morality because of that. So, just think about, contemplate sacredness, contemplate sacrifice. Touched on sacrifice and how they sacrifice to Father Time. Traditionalists sacrifice way more than that. We sacrifice to God, and those sacrifices are pure offerings to God. And this is a concept that a modernist just can't wrap their mind around because, like I said, they've cut off their ability to imagine that. So spend some time thinking about what is sacrifice, contemplate sacrifice, contemplate why people, for instance, why they buy a beer for a fallen soldier friend, and set the beer there. Or pour libation, the same idea. You pour out your drink on the ground in honor of, for the gods or whatever. It's a waste. It doesn't do you any good. It doesn't do anyone any good. It's just a pure waste in the eyes of a modernist. But it's giving a gift to a supernatural, spiritual reality that exists. It's acknowledging the spiritual world that is real. Which is why I also have listed the video on the powers of the soul. It's another one by the Thomistic Institute, so check that one out to really delve into this whole other world, the world of the spiritual realm, the world of your own soul, the intellect and the will, everything above your base passions exists, like we're even with the logic and the reason, intellect, how the intellect works, all these things. You're not just the emotions and the material that is operating within you like a mechanism. Okay. There's just some things to think about and to mull over. So I could give you a lot to listen to this week and to read, and then our next video next week. Next week's going to be a good video. I'm going to delve right into the duties of husbands and wives. I know that's a big one that people are interested in. But your duties towards your spouses and responsibilities in relationships. Essentially, that's traditional gender roles. Okay, what are the traditional gender roles? Where do they come from? And how can you do them better? How can you step into your role in life, wherever God has placed you? My role as wife and mother, I don't know what your role is, but we can list out what tradition and wisdom, the wisdom of the church, has given us for what makes our role so unique, so powerful, so important, so sacred, so necessary for the flourishing of our homes and our families and of society itself. So we'll be talking about that in the next video. So if you found this video interesting and it's resonating with you, please obviously like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. You'll get notified when I post these types of videos, more explainer videos on Sundays at noon, and then I will be posting a vlog every week on Saturdays, behind the scenes, what's going on in my life on Saturdays. So yeah, other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.